Welcome back to History Addict. Today, we're going to step into one of the most defining moments of the American Civil War, Pickett's charge on July 3, 1863. But this time, we're focusing on the Union side, specifically through the eyes of General Winfield Scott Hancock, who was instrumental in securing victory for the Union at Gettysburg. Hancock's leadership not only showcased his military brilliance, but also highlighted the resilience of his soldiers when they faced overwhelming odds. The sun rose over Gettysburg on that third day, casting a haunting glow over the battlefield where so many lives had already been lost. Hancock's II Corps had taken a heavy toll the previous day, with scores of men either killed or wounded. The survivors were exhausted but resolute, knowing they had to hold their position despite their dwindling numbers. The ground they stood on was the same they had fought for, and they were determined not to lose it. Colonel Carroll's brigade, part of General Hayes's division, had been detached and placed under General Howard's command. Except for the 8th Ohio, most of Carroll's men wouldn't engage alongside Hancock's 2nd Corps that day. Despite this, every man who remained on the line was crucial to the Union defense, and Hancock understood this better than anyone. In the early morning, the Union front was mostly calm, with only occasional skirmishes between sharpshooters and the sporadic crackle of gunfire from Confederate forces. The real action was happening further to the right, where the 12th Corps was engaged in heavy fighting. For Hancock and his men, the hours stretched on intense anticipation. Their artillery crews exchanged shots with the Confederate batteries, but otherwise, they waited, knowing that something monumental was brewing. Between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., the battlefield fell eerily silent. It was a calm that seemed unnatural, as if both armies were gathering their strength for what was to come. The tension was palpable. Hancock, a veteran of many battles, knew that this quiet wouldn't last. Around 1 p.m., the silence was obliterated as the Confederate artillery unleashed a ferocious barrage on Hancock's position. It was the most intense bombardment Hancock had ever witnessed. Confederate guns, arranged in a semicircle from the town of Gettysburg to Round Top, opened fire. The Union lines were just 400 yards away, and the enemy's cannons rained down shells with devastating accuracy. Hancock estimated that between 115 and 150 Confederate guns were in action, and the sky above was constantly filled with smoke and explosions. The artillery fire was so intense that there was rarely a moment when multiple shells weren't bursting in the air simultaneously. Union soldiers, caught in the open, scrambled for cover, but the ground offered little in the way of protection. Hastily constructed defenses, trees, and the natural contours of the land were their only shields. Behind the battle lines, anything that could move was swept away by the shelling. Yet, despite this relentless bombardment, the Union infantry held their positions with remarkable composure. Hancock later remarked with pride that scarcely a man deserted his post during those hellish hours. The Union artillery fought back with determination, though they were clearly at a disadvantage. One of the most notable batteries was Brown's Battery B of the 1st Rhode Island, which had already suffered heavy losses the previous day. Having expended all their canister shot, the battery was forced to withdraw, no longer able to contribute effectively to the fight. Yet, other artillery units continued to fire back, trying to hold the line until the Confederate barrage finally began to subside. After nearly 2 hours of punishing bombardment, the Confederate artillery finally began to fall silent. The sudden quiet was ominous. Hancock knew that this was the precursor to the Confederate infantry assault. The artillery had softened the Union lines. Now, the real test would begin. From the woods beyond the Emmitsburg Road, Confederate skirmishers emerged, followed closely by 2 full lines of battle. Smaller support columns followed behind. The Confederate infantry advanced with impressive precision, moving slowly and methodically towards the Union lines. Even the battle-weary Union soldiers couldn't help but respect the discipline and determination of their opponents. The Confederate left flank slightly overlapped the right of General Hayes's division, while their right extended opposite General Gibbon's left flank. Hancock's men watched as over 15,000 Confederate soldiers advanced, stretching across the front of only two of his divisions. Yet, despite the overwhelming numbers, Hancock's men held their fire until the Confederates were within 700 yards, biding their time, ensuring that every shot would count. When the Union soldiers finally opened fire, it was with devastating precision. The Confederate advance faltered as Hancock's men unleashed volley after volley of rifle fire. The Union artillery had already run out of canister shot, so the infantry had to shoulder the burden of repelling the Confederate onslaught. Hancock's soldiers, seasoned by years of war, knew how to make every shot count. One of the first Union units to engage was Standard's Vermont Brigade, positioned in a small grove that provided them with an ideal angle to fire obliquely on the Confederate right flank. Their oblique fire caused havoc among the advancing Confederates, forcing them to shift slightly to the left, but the Confederate soldiers pressed on, seemingly undeterred by the intense fire they faced. As the Confederate lines drew closer, the Union infantry's fire became even more deadly. General Gibbon's and General Hayes's divisions delivered withering volleys, decimating the enemy's ranks. In front of Hayes's division, the Confederate advance collapsed under the combined fire of Union rifles and canister shot from Woodruff's battery. The Union soldiers captured 15 Confederate battle flags and took nearly 2,000 prisoners, an astounding number given the chaos of battle. Despite the devastation on their left, some Confederate units managed to regroup and pressed their attack on Gibbon's division. Led by General Armistead, these soldiers pushed forward towards the low stone wall that marked the Union line. The 69th and 71st Pennsylvania regiments, positioned behind the wall, were caught off guard as Armistead's men surged forward. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the Confederates might break through. Many Union soldiers, overwhelmed by the ferocity of the Confederate attack, began to fall back. But General Webb, along with Colonel Devereux of the 19th Massachusetts Volunteers, acted quickly to stabilize the situation. Devereux, seeing the danger, requested permission from Hancock to move his regiment to reinforce the gap. Hancock, ever decisive, granted the request, and Devereux's regiment moved swiftly to the right. Joined by the 42nd New York and other units from Colonel Hall's brigade, they reinforced the beleaguered Union line just in time. What followed was a brutal, chaotic melee. Soldiers from different Union regiments mixed together as they fought hand-to-hand with the Confederate attackers. Amidst the smoke and confusion, Hancock's men held firm. The Union soldiers, led by their officers, rallied behind their regimental colors and began to push the Confederates back. As the Union soldiers advanced, the Confederate attack began to unravel. The Confederate troops, exhausted and outnumbered, either surrendered or retreated. In the aftermath, the Union soldiers reclaimed the stone wall and captured several more Confederate battle flags. The Union had won the day, and Pickett's charge had ended in disaster for the Confederacy. Hancock, though gravely wounded during the fight, remained on the field long enough to see the victory secured. In his official report, Hancock described the battle in vivid detail, praising the bravery and resilience of his men. His account captures the chaos, the courage, and the ultimate triumph of the Union forces on that day. Thank you for tuning in to History Addict. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for more in-depth explorations of pivotal moments in history. See you in the next episode.